Hello, good morning for those that weren't on the stage this morning. So we got two back-to-back sessions. So straight after this one, we've also got Riam talking about everything that's been going on with hacktivism, which is rather a lot. But first up, we've got Matt. Matt's going to talk about junk ransomware. And, well, what's it say? Max Wixey is a legend. So Max is a senior threat intelligence researcher at Sophos. He is a former penetration tester. I didn't know that. We won't hold it against you. It's fine. We all make mistakes. And previously led cybersecurity R&D capabilities at professional services firms and law enforcement agencies, digging into emerging threat vectors, vulnerabilities, and new tech. Matt, this is definitely not his first rodeo. He's presented all over the world at a lot of big forums, from Black Hat to DEF CON to ISF, 44Con, BrewCon, you name it. So he is definitely somebody we sit back and listen to. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I apologise in advance. I'm getting over a bad cold at the moment, so my voice isn't particularly melodic at the best of times, but apologies if I do sound a bit congested. So this is Junk Gun Ransomware, exploring a niche in the ransomware ecosystem. My name is Matt Wixey. I'm a senior threat researcher on the Sophos XOps team. And as Rob said, I previously worked as a pen tester, an R&D lead, and a threat intelligence analyst at PwC UK. Before that, did cyber R&D for a law enforcement agency, looking at technologies that criminals were using. And I have a particular interest in criminal forums, which is what we're going to talk about today, unusual attack vectors, and niche research as well. So what we're going to cover is some background to what we call junk gun ransomware, the features and prevalence of it, why it's important, some tiers of ransomware status and how junk gun ransomware feeds into that, some of the implications of our findings and our research, and ending with a call to action as well. So let's start with some background. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what a junk gun is? It's not a particularly common term in the UK. I work with a team of Americans, so it's their fault. A junk gun is a cheap, primitive firearm. They flooded the US firearms market in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we thought it was analogous to some of the ransomware that we discovered on some of these criminal forums. So junk gun ransomware is cheap, primitive ransomware, often quite unreliable ransomware, typically available for one-off prices, so it's not run as a ransomware-as-a-service model. It's not a subscription cost in most cases. It's typically made by independent threat actors, and then it's sold independently for those one-off prices. And it is quite a low barrier to entry as well, so there are very little skills required to actually use it, and we'll talk about how it feeds into the ransomware ecosystem a little bit later. So when you look at junk gun ransomware as opposed to the traditional or the dominant ransomware-as-a-service model, there are no leak sites with junk gun ransomware. There is no centralized source of information about attacks. There are no IABs, initial access brokers, who buy and sell access to organizations. There's no profit sharing with ransomware-as-a-service operators. So if you are deploying junk gun ransomware, you keep 100% of the profits. There's no affiliate system or program. There are no corporate-like hierarchies. So you may remember from the Conti leaks a couple of years ago, one of the big takeaways from that was that Conti was run almost like a corporate organization, had an HR department, a legal department, and a very strict hierarchy of leadership. Obviously, with junk gun ransomware, it's much more of an independent model. There are no huge ransom demands. We're not talking about millions, even hundreds of thousands. We're talking about thousands or hundreds of dollars. No publicity stunts. Alfie, and Black Hat, for example, recently have engaged in various public disagreements with journalists and victim organizations. Lockbit, you may remember a few years ago, offered to pay people for getting a tattoo of its logo. So there's nothing like that with junk gun ransomware. This is very much under the radar. And along the same lines, there's no slick branding or marketing with junk gun ransomware. I'll show you some examples of some of the quite amateurish logos that the junk gun ransomware uses. There's no headline seeking. So we did some research a few months ago, about the relationship between the media and prominent ransomware gangs, and how ransomware gangs are increasingly looking to leverage journalists. They have separate Telegram channels and PR channels to speak to journalists. They give interviews and that kind of thing. Again, nothing like that. Junk gun ransomware users tend very much to focus on small to medium businesses or even individuals, and they're just not looking to generate the same kind of publicity and press. And then from our side, from the industry side, there's very little or sometimes no in-depth analysis or tracking of junk gun ransomware variants or threat actors. So why does it matter? Essentially, this is just low-quality malware, and we've seen that for decades. We've seen low-quality rats and Trojans and that kind of thing. So why does it actually matter? Firstly, it's quite a new thing. So I'll talk about the timescale, the time frame that we looked at shortly, but this does seem to be quite a new development, and there is a lot of junk gun ransomware out there, lots of people looking to get in on the ransomware game. It allows lower skilled threat actors to get in on the action. So I'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you're a threat actor looking to become an affiliate to a prominent ransomware family, as well as having to stump up some cash initially, you also have to typically go through a kind of skills test, or at least an interview, to show that you have the skills necessary to become an affiliate. That's not the case here. You can be the skiddiest skiddy who ever skiddied, and you can start deploying ransomware. It also enables targeting of small or medium businesses, SMBs, and individuals, as we'll see, which is quite an interesting development. And lastly, it's a threat because it's quite hard to track this stuff. It's hard to get samples unless you actually pay for them. Because the attacks are not publicized as much, it is difficult to actually get samples of this ransomware and find out what's going on. So if you're a threat actor looking to get into ransomware, junk gun ransomware does have an obvious appeal. As I said, there's no skills test or interview, there's no background check, you don't need anybody to refer you in or anything like that. You don't need upfront cash, so the amount of upfront cash you need if you're joining a prominent ransomware family does differ. Sometimes it's hundreds of dollars, sometimes it's thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. But crucially, and this is something that junk gun ransomware developers are using in their advertisements as well, there's no risk of operators ripping you off. There's no exit scams, as we've seen with some recent allegations with Alfie and Black Cat. There's no risk of ransomware-as-a-service operators taking over negotiations, as they have done in the past. And there's no risk of of your bosses basically getting nicked and your infrastructure getting disrupted, which is what's happened with Lockbit recently, obviously. As I mentioned before, you keep 100% of the profits, and there are no restrictions on targets. So unlike some of the prominent ransomware families, where you are not allowed to target hospitals, schools, charities, allegedly, here you can basically just attack anybody you want. So we did some digging into this. We found a couple of examples, and we thought maybe there's more to this, so we did some more digging across 4 lower-tier criminal forums, English language forums, Breach forums, which was taken down recently, Oni forums, which recently changed its name, the new name escapes me, Hack forums, which some of you will be familiar with, quite an old forum, but very, very heavily populated by script kiddies, and Cafe Dread, which is an interesting one. It has a dedicated hacking section, but it's more prominently associated with drugs. So we looked at 4 of these lower tier forums between June 2023, so about a year ago, and February this year, and we found 19 examples of junk gun ransomware. Now that's not exhaustive. There will obviously be variants on other forums or advertised on Telegram channels and so on, but 19 is quite a significant number. So here's a brief summary of some of the ones we found. Don't worry if you can't read that, because we have a blog article where this is available in more detail. But these are some of the 19, or these are the 19 varieties we found. You can see a lot of them are unnamed, which is quite interesting. So there's no investment in branding or kind of name brand recognition at all. 2 of these were open source, so they're just available for free on GitHub, but the majority of them were for sale, again for that one-off price, and I'll cover prices and so on a little bit later. We also recorded the language that the ransomware variant was written in, if that information was available, whether or not it's been used in the wild attacks, if that information was available. Detection. So detection is something that is often used as a selling point on these forums when it comes to malware, and particularly with junk gun ransomware. If you can say that your junk gun ransomware is FUD, which means fully undetected as opposed to fear, uncertainty, and doubt, then that can be used as a selling point. However, the flip side of that is because these threat actors are targeting small or medium businesses or individuals, sometimes the detection rate doesn't actually matter that much. And then we also looked at the features where that was available. So things like the encryption algorithm that's used, whether other features are bundled in with the junk gun ransomware, so things like key logging and info stealing, whether it's multi-threaded encryption or single-threaded, whether it supports remote encryption or local encryption, and so on. So let's talk about prices and money. So the lowest price we observed was $20. That was for a single build of a junk gun ransomware called Cryptina, which targets Linux specifically. The highest we saw was 0.5 Bitcoins, which at the time of doing this research was about $13,000 US dollars. That was for a ransomware called Ergon, which is a possible outlier for a couple of reasons, which I'll come on to. The median average was $375. The mode was $500. So the mean average, if you include Ergon, was $1,300. If you take away Ergon, it's $400, just a little over $400. So quite cheap, relatively speaking. This is an example of the advert for Cryptina version 2. So this is the one that targets Linux. This is kind of typical for the amount of detail you get about these junk gun ransomware variants, the features, the advertising, that kind of thing. Not particularly slick in terms of the branding, unlike some types of malware that we've seen available for sale. This is another one. This is for an unnamed junk gun ransomware written in C++. As you can see, it goes into some detail about the features. It's threaded, it deletes shadow copies, that kind of thing. And these are the adverts for Ergon, or part of the adverts for Ergon. So Ergon is an interesting one. It claims to be enterprise-grade ransomware. Does claim, or the developer does claim that it's been used in multiple attacks with an extremely high success rate. We weren't able to verify that. It claims that it's fully undetectable. And as you can see, the price is half a Bitcoin per compile with support, although the nature of that support wasn't clarified. If you want the source code to Ergon, it's 2.5 Bitcoin, so a considerable premium. Interestingly, Ergon was the only variant we saw where the developer wanted revenue from the attack, 10% of the revenue from the attack. Quite how they enforced that, we don't know, but yeah, that was interesting. Every other variant we saw did not have that stipulation. So most of the junk gun ransomware we saw used a single one-off pricing model. There were 3 exceptions that used a subscription model, so $50 a month, $99 to $199 a month, or $999 per month, or $10,000 for a lifetime license. And as you saw in the previous slide, Ergon also offered source code as well as single builds. Cryptina also did that as well, again at a premium. This is an example of Diablo ransomware. This one also bundles in what's called the Sherlock keylogger. Now this one was one of the $50 a month models. And as you can see, again, you've got quite a lot of detail about the various features and stuff. As you will have noticed from the table, and as I pointed out, some of the junk gun ransomware variants had no name at all, which is pretty interesting. It just shows that it's not a big deal for them, really. However, there were a couple of interesting examples, Diablo and Jigsaw, which possibly deliberately used names associated with much older ransomware, whether that was to try and trick naive users into buying them thinking that they were variants of that older ransomware, or whether they just thought it was a cool name and wanted to reuse it, we don't know. So the screenshot here is from a forum where the Jigsaw developer is claiming that they're not related to the old Jigsaw, which was active in around 2015, 2016. Are these guys actually making any profit from selling junk gun ransomware given the low prices? Well, the Cryptina developer actually said that they made little to no money off it at all and had to actually kill the project in the end. However, a developer of a junk gun called Nevermore, which we'll talk about a little bit later, said that they'd made more than they expected from this, although that wasn't clear whether that was from actually selling the junk gun ransomware or from actually deploying ransomware. There's also the interesting possibility that some of these variants could be scams in themselves. So we did some research about 2 years ago now on the degree of scamming on criminal forums, so threat actors scamming each other. And one of the interesting things we found was that this not only included typical things like rip and run scams, where you offer to pay someone, you get something, and then you just never pay them, but it also included things like backdoored malware. So giving someone a piece of malware that actually contained a backdoor and then allowed you to compromise them. So there's a possibility that some of these junk gun ransomware variants are scams. We only found one example of that, or one allegation of that, which was for another unnamed junk gun variant. And then you can see here someone said, this is a con, I swear, you cheat me out of $149, your parents are going to hell, which is on the polite side of some of the allegations that we saw in our previous piece of research. So the languages that these are written in, so 12 of the 19 adverts contain some detail about the language or the framework used. And perhaps unsurprisingly, .NET, C# was the most popular with 5. possibly because it's got a shallower learning curve. C++ and C accounted for 5 as well, 1 in Python and 1 in Go. So none in Rust, which was interesting, given that that's becoming quite a popular language to write ransomware in. That was interesting. But yeah, most of them were in .NET or C#. So you can see here a screenshot from a forum where someone has basically said they have aspirations to make something which is similar to the quote-unquote APT players, such as Black Hat Play, Blackbuster. So for these junk gun developers, they're definitely aspiring to be like the big ransomware gangs. This person in particular is writing their malware or their ransomware in Go and using Salsa 20, which is interesting, rather than AES-256 or anything like that. This is a screenshot of Nevermore. So Nevermore was one of the more popular junk gun ransomware variants in the sense that it got the most interest on the forums on which it was advertised. So as you can see, this is a builder for ransomware. It's not the most aesthetically sophisticated graphical interface you've ever seen, but it did generate quite a lot of interest on the forum that it was advertised on. And the developer behind this, as we'll talk about a little bit later, has some interesting ideas about ransomware and some interesting kind of ideas about attack vectors and innovations and that kind of thing. So malware in general is often written in C or C++, but as I said, some modern ransomware has shifted to Rust and Go. We only saw one junk gun written in Go. Possibly because there's a shallower learning curve with .NET and C#, that could explain why some junk gun ransomware is written in that. But generally, optimization or aesthetics not particularly important for these guys, reflected in the lack of branding. So this is one junk gun variant called Lollycrypt. As you can see, not a great deal of effort has been put into the logo there. It's not particularly important to them, compared to the likes of Lockbit and Alfie and that kind of thing. So let's talk about some of the features. So AES-256 and RSA-2048 were the most popular encryption algorithms, appearing in 7 out of 10 where that detail was given. We also noticed some relatively esoteric algorithms, so CHAR-CHAR-20, XT, Salsa-20. Whether that's done for speed, whether it's done because they're just more familiar with that, whether it's just to stand out, we're not sure. This is an example from Lonnie 2.0, and this claims to be a cross-platform one, interestingly, but this one uses XT. We noticed that 4 varieties bundled other capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, things like info stealing and key logging. Only 3, interestingly, referred to deleting volume shadow copies, which is quite a prominent feature of big ransomware or prominent ransomware. 6 mentioned multi-threaded encryption, which tends to be a kind of de facto standard now anyway. Only Cryptina targeted Linux, although 2 others, including Lollycrypt and Lonnie, claim to be cross-platform, so able to target both Windows and Linux. Interestingly, only Lonnie claimed to have remote encryption capabilities. Now that is interesting because there has been a big shift, certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, of ransomware using remote encryption capabilities because it enables them to bypass security solutions. They're not attacking files on the machine on which the ransomware is running, they're attacking machines across the network. So that does tend to be, again, a sort of de facto standard with ransomware. So the fact that only Lonnie out of those 19 variants claim to have remote encryption capabilities is interesting. It does suggest perhaps that junk gun developers and buyers are less interested in those kind of large-scale corporate environments and more interested in small to medium businesses, which is something we'll see when we talk about some of their discussions around targeting and intentions. Only 2 variants mentioned any kind of anti-virtual machine or anti-debugger features. Here's an example here. I think this is from an unnamed variant. And you can see this one was available for $200 and claimed to have anti-virtual machine, anti-debugger features. What exactly those were, we're not sure. It could be kind of quite primitive or it could be sophisticated, we just don't know. When you look at what the junk gun developers themselves are actually saying about their ambitions, you find some interesting stuff. So the Lonnie developer, for example, here goes on a bit of a rant about why people should not engage in partnerships with the Ransomware-as-a-Service providers, why they shouldn't become affiliates of ransomware schemes. So you can see here they've said Ransomware-as-a-Service schemes, you have to pay 20% fee to the operators. you have to conduct all negotiations on their website, and they can intervene and take it over. They can scam you, deactivate your account, disrupt your operations, that kind of thing. But then, interestingly, later on in this thread, the Lonnie developer went on to say that they had ambitions eventually to launch a leak site for people using Lonnie ransomware. So trying to basically cherry pick elements of ransomware-as-a-service operations that they agree with or they think could be beneficial, but stopping short of actually engaging in ransomware-as-a-service itself. We saw one instance, interestingly, of a junk gun ransomware developer mimicking some ransomware-as-a-service rules when it comes to targeting. So this, I think, was for an unnamed variant, and you can see here they've said you're not allowed to target hospitals, governments, mom and pop shops, so independent businesses, or mass spreading. But it was really unclear how that would actually be enforced, given that this is not done under an affiliate scheme. So whether they're just trying to imitate them for the sake of imitating them, or whether they're actually trying to distance themselves from what people do with their ransomware once they've sold it, is unclear. So to what extent has this stuff actually been used in the wild? It's really difficult to tell, basically. Because there's no supporting infrastructure, there are no leak sites, there's no central source of information, there's nowhere we can go where we say this organization has definitely been hit by this form of ransomware. Because these guys are targeting small, medium businesses and or individuals, the attacks are unlikely to be publicized to the same extent as big organizations, and therefore it's difficult to obtain indicators of compromise. There were some examples where we know for sure that they've been used in the wild. So Evil Extractor, which was it's ransomware, but also bundled with various other capabilities. That has definitely been used in the wild recently. And there were 3 variants, Ergon, Lonnie, and Lollycrypt, where the developers or users claimed that they had been used in the wild, as you can see here. So someone saying that, yeah, I've been using this for a bit, it works as advertised. Another one saying, this is from the developer, saying, yes, it has been tested in real-world attacks, but no further information about what those attacks were, how successful they were, and so on. In addition to these kind of independent junk gun ransomware variants, which are quite new, at least unknown to us, we also found some examples of better-known ransomware on these forums. When I say better-known, I mean that they have absolutely definitely been used in the wild attacks. They appear on Ransom Watch and things like that. So you can see we've got these examples here, Insane, Zeppelin, Endurance, Chaos, Killing, and so on. And we divided these into several categories. So these were not typically offered as one-off builds for sale. Instead, these were either requests for help with development, they were direct affiliate recruitment, the builder was offered for sale, or the source code was offered for sale. As you can see, only one of them actually had a price associated with it. The others either didn't have that information or it wasn't applicable. So a couple of examples. You can see someone offering the Stop or Deja Vu crypto locker for sale. A screenshot from Hakuna Matata, which is a ransomware builder, again offered for sale. Someone looking for help with Insane ransomware, which I don't think I have a screenshot of it here, but it has a very garish, kind of almost GeoCities aesthetic to it, so it's worth having a look at. But yeah, Insane ransomware, I was looking for help with development. And then someone looking for help, someone recruiting affiliates. So recruiting teams of experienced pen testers, which is usually used on these forums and other forums as a euphemism for initial access brokers or affiliates. So yeah, looking to recruit affiliates. And you'll notice there at the bottom of that one, actually, we work only after an interview, which goes back to what I said earlier about skills tests and background checks and that kind of thing. A couple of other examples, a new ransomware family called TrapTight, which was looking for skilled individuals. This was a brand new ransomware family as far as we could tell. Interestingly here, you'll notice at the bottom of that advert, they say they have 12 spots available, of which 4 have already been taken. So they're building a team. And then an unnamed ransomware family looking for experienced, again, pen testers, quote unquote, targeting medium or big corporations. So if you're a threat actor on these forums, on these lower tier English language forums, as opposed to the more exclusive Russian language forums, you do have some options when it comes to career paths and what you want to do with your career. So if you're a developer, you can create and sell junk gun ransomware. You can just do it in Visual Studio or whatever. And then maybe that will lead to opportunities down the line with you developing malware for more prominent ransomware families. If you're a self-starter, you're looking to make some money, you can buy a one-off junk gun ransomware for, as we saw, as little as $20 and just start launching attacks against anyone. If you are after something that's a bit more tried and tested, you could buy a builder for a better known ransomware variant and generate a malware that way. If you're a little bit more ambitious, you could seek employment as an affiliate with a known lower tier family, or you can get on the ground floor and seek employment as an affiliate with a completely brand new ransomware family, or any combination of all of those. So let's talk a little bit about intentions, tutorials, and targets. So I mentioned small to medium businesses and individuals here. So this is some of the discussions that happen on these forums about who to actually target with these things. So on the top here, you can see someone's got the Nevermore ransomware builder, and they're looking to actually spread it. They're asking for advice on how do I go about it? How do I actually attack people with it? So should I look on Shodan, for example, for vulnerable RDP or SSH servers? So exactly the same sorts of techniques that initial access brokers would use, but this person is doing it all themselves. On the bottom there, you've got someone who is talking about targeted phishing to gain a foothold, then running ransomware, and you can see they're talking about what would be a suitable target. So I've considered high schools, universities. Does anyone know what would be some good possible targets in terms of possible gain, lack of backups, chance of foothold? So these guys are trying to get solicit advice from each other on the best types of people to attack, or the best types of organizations to attack. Interestingly, as you can expect, the level of skill is questionable in places. So this person said they've hacked the network. I've never deployed a ransomware. Can anybody write a good post or a tutorial on that? On the other end of the spectrum, someone's saying they've got low-level access to a $7 billion, presumably a company with $7 billion revenue in the USA. How do I infect their network via a USB with some ransomware or something? So yeah, let's make some money. I'll be relying on you to guide me to do it correctly and properly. So these guys aren't always the most experienced, but they definitely have ambitions and aspirations. On the bottom here, someone's saying, is it worth ransoming very small companies? So if I find vulnerable organizations through Google Docs or something like that, how would I go about contacting them? How would I run negotiations? How much money should I ask for? That kind of stuff. This top screenshot here, someone saying that they are a mid-level reverse engineer, which was interesting, but have no idea how I can infect people with ransomware. So they talk about some various techniques and that kind of thing, but again, are soliciting help. Someone on the bottom posting links or posting the PDF version of the Bastalord ransomware manual. Bastalord, or aka Fisheye, is a well-known ransomware affiliate, or was a well-known ransomware affiliate, and created a manual of how to attack organizations and deploy ransomware. Someone here came up with their own tutorial on various methods of how to actually encrypt files, creating payloads, spreading ransomware, how to ensure you get payment, how to test it, that kind of thing. So that was shared for free on a criminal forum. This is an interesting innovation here. So we noted, as well as people saying, let's target small, medium businesses, we did notice some different approaches. So this person, this junk gun ransomware has no decryption key. It cannot be decrypted. So you encrypt their files, but then that's it. You get their payment, and then you just tell them to do one. So this person has said that the reason that they've done this is because it's to target specific people, such as scammers, lowlifes, etc. But yeah, that's an interesting one. So that's targeted at individuals, and that ransomware is available for $500 in Monero. This is the Nevermore developer. I mentioned this a bit earlier, this interesting approach to ransomware. So this person, this developer, advocates physical attacks against machines. So putting ransomware on a USB stick, socially engineering your way into an organization or into someone's house or whatever, and then putting ransomware on their computer. So that's interesting. You can see here they've got quite a few tips on how to do that. On how to escape detection, avoiding witnesses and cameras and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. And then aspirations. So we noticed even below that script kiddie tier, an even lower tier. So these are people who have aspirations to develop junk gun ransomware, but just don't have the skill or knowledge to do it yet. So I want to write ransomware. What's the most suitable language to do that in? Under that, someone saying, should I write ransomware in Java? To which the answer is obviously no. The course I'm studying only teaches me how to make it in Java. And then someone saying that they've developed a Ransomware-as-a-Service panel and they're about 70% done, but they're a bit confused about what to do next and want some help. And then we noticed some people who were just curious about how the ransomware for sale ecosystem works. So someone saying, what do people mean when they say rent my malware or ransomware for X number of days? How does that work? Interestingly, the person who replied to that, who is the Nevermore developer, as their response, used the analogy of big prominent tech companies, which was interesting. Someone saying here, how do you actually set a price for your malware? So once you've developed it, how do you actually price it? And they've asked for examples for a rat, ransomware, a botnet, custom malware, and that kind of thing. How and where do I sell my malware? So I finished writing it, but I don't actually know how to sell it. So all this was kind of interesting, and it led us to come up with a kind of theory about tiers of status when it comes to ransomware. So on the likes of prominent Russian language criminal forums like Exploit and XSS, which you might be familiar with, people posting things like this would be absolutely ridiculed. They'd be laughed out of the forum because they are populated by, well, there are script kiddies on there, but generally they're populated by higher skilled threat actors. There's also ostensibly a ban on ransomware posts on those forums since the Colonial Pipeline attack, which brought a lot of negative attention to those forums. People do get round it, and it's the extent to which it's enforced is a bit erratic. But ostensibly there's a ban on ransomware posts. But these lower tier forums, so breach forums, Omni forums, Dread, hack forums, deliberately cater to lower skilled threat actors. And they may well produce the next generation of threat actors. So these are people who are learning their craft. They're experimenting, they're playing around, they're going up against small to medium businesses or individuals, and they're learning how to do things. So whereas most of the research that we do in CTI when it comes to criminal marketplaces tends to focus on things like Exploit and XSS, actually there is some value in looking at these lower tier forums because they do have some interesting ideas. There is a market there, it's a niche market, but they are targeting small, medium businesses and individuals. And this may well be the first step in a career path. So if you look at the top tier of criminal forums or the top tier of ransomware status, these tend to be prominent ransomware families. Typically, these are operating on closed forums or on private channels. They may have some presence on well-known Russian language forums. So Lockbit, for example, was active on Exploit and XSS. Not typically discussing ransomware stuff, but they had an active presence there. On the second tier, you have affiliates of top tier families and initial access brokers. These are people who are active on well-known Russian language forums. These are the people who are selling accesses in auctions and that kind of thing. And you also have operators of secondary or emerging ransomware. They may have a limited presence on more well-known English language forums, so things like breach forums. Then on the third tier, you have affiliates, developers, and operators of newer and less prominent ransomware, so some of the ones that we discussed earlier. They may be active on some Russian language forums and better-known English language forums. Then below them, you have developers and buyers of junk gun ransomware, as I said, used for standalone attacks against small businesses and individuals. Tend to be active on both prominent and lesser-known English language forums. And then finally, that fifth tier that I mentioned, where you have users who are seeking to gain those skills. They don't have them yet, but they're looking to learn from other people. They're asking questions. They're looking for tutorials, and they tend to be active on lesser-known English language forums. So what are the implications of all this? Well, there are several implications. There are implications for the ransomware ecosystem. So the ransomware market is increasingly fractured and saturated. If you look at the past 3 years, the explosion in the number of ransomware families that are active doesn't really show any signs of stopping. So the advent of junk gun ransomware may signal that that's just going to continue and that there are going to be more and more lower tier ransomware families entering the market. Or it could indicate a shift perhaps towards distinct tiers of targeting. So you have the big ransomware families who are going after the big targets, and they're kind of leaving the scraps for the smaller families or individuals. It may also, of course, just be a reflection of capitalism in action, that there's a niche here in that the big ransomware families are typically not going to bother with smaller companies just because they know they can't afford to pay the ransom, and so there is a gap in the market there waiting for someone to come and fill it. Implications for potential targets. Obviously, small, medium businesses and individuals are at risk. Typically, not always, but typically they tend to be less well defended, less knowledgeable, less informed and less prepared. They may not have security solutions, behavioral detections, that kind of thing. May cause death by 1,000 cuts, where you have companies being hit multiple times by small threat actors. And they may not be able to afford negotiators, incident response or remediation. And there are some implications for us in the industry as well. So it's difficult to obtain samples, as I mentioned earlier. It's difficult to determine if junk gun ransomware has been used in the wild. Difficult to track new variants. The forums on which these guys operate tend to be less monitored, just because we tend to focus, quite understandably, on the more exclusive criminal forums where the exciting stuff is happening. And of course, we're already devoting time and resources to tracking numerous threats, not just ransomware, although obviously that's a big one, but lots of other threats as well across various sources. So it is difficult to try and keep track of all this as well. So a brief call to action is that I think this is an underexplored research area. I think there is more that could be done to look at junk gun ransomware, how it's evolving, how its users, developers, and buyers are using it. So yeah, if you work in CTI and you are looking at forums, consider monitoring these forums as well for new variants. Not just because it can protect or help to protect small and medium businesses and individuals now, but also because it can provide insights into what threat actors are aspiring to do in the future, how they're actually accomplishing that, and potential wider trends as well. So that is me. I finished a little bit early, I think, but yeah, I think that's it. So thank you.